Welcome to the Mystic Detectives podcast, where we seek to unlock the wonders of the unknown. I'm one of your hosts, Crystal Miller.
And I'm your other host, Andrea Marziano.
Hi, Andrea. How are you this evening?
I'm doing well. And it's still a little early for me. It's 4 p.m. my time. Anyway, I'm doing really well. I had a really fun time last night.
What were you doing last night?
Well, I facilitated a sound bath. And,
Oh, yeah, you
our,
told me you were going to do that. I remember.
yeah,
How
and
did-
our listeners can go listen to the episode of sound baths and why they're beneficial. It was the first time I've done a sound bath with this other individual, and we both have sets of crystal bowls. And we had practiced, we did a dress rehearsal and all of that. And it went really well. We had two people come, which we thought we might have a few more, but it was good. It turned out really well, and we felt comfortable with what we did. Things flowed pretty much the way we had in mind. We got a little off track for a second, but we recovered, and the participants didn't know that we looked at each other like, what? And one time I had discussed with my friend Juliana, who did it, that we're going to make mistakes, but the people listening won't probably even notice.
Right.
And both of us did sort of an error. I hit the side of a bowl with my mallet, and she has a crystal triangle and hit it with the wrong end of her mallet, and so it made a big clang noise. And we both looked at each other, and I said, whatever we do, don't go, just keep going. And so she didn't, and I didn't. And afterwards they said, you did? We didn't hear that. To us, it sounded like a giant gong. But it was so fun and just really peaceful for all of us. And our participants had really nice feedback. And it was a lot of fun. I felt like we all gained from the experience.
That's awesome. That sounds awesome.
It was.
Okay, well, I'm going to tell you really quickly. I'm taking Torin to look at a car this evening later after this podcast, and it's a stick shift, and they are really nervous about getting a manual car.
I didn't even know there were stick shifts available anymore, for heaven's sakes.
Yeah, I just bought a Jetta that's a stick that Holly drives. So
that's awesome.
Anyway,
they're a lot of fun. It's a good way to control speed and things like that.
Yeah, I prefer it. I don't know why. But anyway, let's let our guest introduce herself. Just for transparency's sake, she is my daughter.
Hello, I'm Ciana, Crystal's daughter, and my first car was a stick shift, just in case anyone was wondering. And that's how I learned to drive. And I have been a yoga instructor for about 4 years, although I haven't necessarily been instructing all those 4 years, but that's when I became certified and took the course and everything. And I love yoga, so I'm here excited to talk about it.
Awesome.
That's great. And I was just going to say, I have participated in several of your yoga classes and really enjoyed it when we did a joint work experience. So I can say, for one, you did a good job.
Thank you.
Oh, and also what I was going to tell you too about it that I really liked is that your flow was always good, and you checked in with your clients all the time, and not all the time obnoxiously, but all consistently. How's that? And so it was really a fun experience.
Awesome. I like to make yoga accessible to as many people as possible because I think that everyone deserves to have something like that in their life if they want it.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, so Ciana's also done yoga sessions with me for like my mobility and my flexibility and stuff. We haven't done anything since my hip transplant. What the hell was that? My hip replacement.
Whose did you take? Give it back.
But it helped a lot before I injured my hip to do yoga with her. Matter of fact, one day Holly came over to my house and we were gonna play a game or something, and the table didn't have enough room, and so I plopped down on the floor, and she was like, holy shit, you can sit on the floor. I was like, yeah.
Made you sit on the floor and stand up twice a day, every day.
All because of Ciana. So
very good. Well, it's ironically when my friend and I were deciding how to play our instruments, we thought about doing it on the floor, but we had to get up and down quite a few times, and both of us are able to, but we were afraid we'd do something like grunt or make noises, and we just didn't think that was going to add to the ambiance of the experience.
Yeah. So, Sienna, tell us how you got involved with yoga.
So, when I was like 18, I was already having pain all over my body, especially my back. And I was just looking for like some relief somehow. I went to the doctor, I went to a chiropractor, I was getting massages, and certain things were helping for sure. But it was still there. There was still mostly in like my neck and shoulders area, just a lot of tension that I couldn't get rid of it. And so a friend of mine suggested that we start going to yoga together like twice a week, and we started going to this place called Core Power Yoga. And having a buddy, first of all, helped a lot. But I noticed that it was helping my back feel so much better. And I also noticed that it was a time to kind of go within myself and kind of disconnect from, the busyness of my life. And so I started really, really enjoying it, got a membership to Core Power, and we started going just all the time. And, I've kind of gone through phases where I'm doing yoga all the time and then kind of fall out of it a little bit. But I definitely notice when I'm doing yoga regularly, even if it's just like 5 minutes a day, um, my body feels so much better.
Yeah.
So that would be the main reason, and I think that's how a lot of people get into yoga is through, like, the actual body practice of it, the postures and everything, but there is so much more to yoga that you can just keep going deeper and deeper and deeper, and that is why I wanted to do the teacher training as well, was just to kind of get a well-rounded experience of yoga rather than just the postures.
So you, I was going to call you yoga. So yoga.
That's me.
Goodness. Wow. So Sienna, what would you define yoga as? I've seen a lot of varieties of yoga. Is it all kind of the same thing, or are there a lot of different types?
There are different types, but it really kind of all comes down to the same thing, which is at its most base level, combining movement with your breath. So as you move, taking deep breaths and, exhaling when you do certain things, inhaling when you do certain things. All parts of yoga, all kinds of yoga have that to some degree. Um, I learned kind of like a vinyasa style. Vinyasa just means flow. So
Mm.
it's kind of more like a flowy,
Like a dance?
kinda. I was like choreographed, not quite, but
Hmm.
I'm trying to say that it like flows all together from beginning to end. You flow through the poses and your breath is included in that.
For that type, when you're talking about it, is it a prescribed sort of order, or does a person do it how they like it?
Yeah, so there are certain types of yoga that are like a prescribed order, like you just said. For example, there's this kind called Ashtanga, that is a certain amount of poses that you do, and you as you're a beginner, you start with just doing the first 5 poses, for example, and then you move forward, you add the 6th one, you add the 7th one, and then it's like I can't remember how many, 48 or something.
Yeah.
So it's just like a bunch of poses in a row. There's also Bikram yoga, which is similar. It's the same poses every time. Vinyasa, on the other hand, there are kind of groups of poses that you typically would do together. Like I'm sure you've all heard of a vinyasa typically is
Hmm.
like a downward dog, plank, lower down, upward dog, downward dog again. So, it's like people call that a vinyasa, but really vinyasa is just kind of like a style of flowing it together. And it has some of those kind of groupings of poses, but it can be very, very flexible with what order you do them in and which ones you do. You can easily take out certain parts of it and add different parts in. You can easily modify any of the poses so that if you can't do a push up, you don't have to. And you're still doing yoga and you're still doing vinyasa yoga. So definitely a more flexible kind.
I love that. And so, what would you talked about people do get involved with yoga mostly for body motion? I have heard a lot of people going in for pain reduction
Mhm.
because flexibility and using our muscles and joints and things can reduce pain. Are there other kinds of benefits that people might get from yoga?
Yeah. So honestly, when people think of yoga, they imagine people doing these really flexible postures and being really skinny and like, sometimes it's like a blonde lady. But yeah, but yoga is like honestly a way of life. There's so much more to it than the poses. There's actually 8 limbs of yoga, and the poses is just one of them. It's called asana in Hindi. No, Sanskrit.
Sanskrit. Okay.
Sanskrit,
I
yes.
was going to say
Okay.
that, but I didn't know. Yeah.
Yeah, so asana means posture in Sanskrit, and that's just one of the 8 limbs of yoga. We also have pranayama, which is your breath, and then there's 6 other ones that people almost never talk about.
I've never
So
heard of them.
yeah, so they are the namas, which is like how you interact with the world, like your morals. There's the niyamas, which is how you kind of see yourself and like almost kind of like promises you make to yourself. There's meditation. There's sense deprivation. There's all sorts of these different kind of aspects of yoga that gets left out of the mainstream conversation, I think. So just from the even just doing basic yoga, I think that the pain relief is a huge thing. But there's also this aspect of kind of getting more in tune with yourself, and also being kind to yourself and like kind of changing how you interact with your own self. Like for example, when I first started doing yoga, doing a hard class, I would feel just terrible after because I was like, oh, I couldn't do any of that. I suck at yoga, I'm bad at this, it's not for me, maybe even. But the more kind you are to yourself on the mat, the more that you listen to yourself and you maybe make some modifications, you change what you're doing so that it doesn't hurt you, and you're staying within your own like limits that your body has, which is totally fine. Everybody has limits. Um, I feel that you can take those kinds of things that you practice on the mat off of the mat too. So when I practice being kind to myself and like paying attention, like, oh, this posture hurts, I'm gonna adjust a little bit even if it's not the right shape. And when I say right shape, I'm doing air quotes because there's no such thing as the right shape, in my opinion.
Mhm.
um, then maybe next time I mess up at work, I can practice being kinder to myself as well. I can take what I've learned on the mat and apply it in other places in my life. So I think that's a huge benefit that you can get. And you don't have to know about the 8 limbs of yoga to get that. All you have to do is kind of take some time to listen to your own intuition, your own body, um, breathe,
Mhm.
and see how it feels.
Wow, I love that. And does namaste come from the nama part of it? Is that related or is it just a similar word?
I think it might just be a similar word, but I don't actually know.
Yeah.
I do think a lot of Sanskrit, it does build on itself like that, and you
Mhm.
can make words by like combining 2 words. You can make like a new word. So it actually totally could be, but I've never heard that, so I'm not sure.
Hmm. I don't know either. I know last
Mhm.
night during the sound bath, even though people were relaxed, there were a few times I got to remind them to breathe
Mhm.
because they just I would think that in the relaxed state, that would be the easiest time to breathe, but I noticed a couple of times that one of the ladies was sort of holding her breath, or at least it appeared she was holding
Mhm.
her breath, and I said, "Okay, go ahead and take a breath," and, do the soft I call it my soft, peaceful voice, and then I saw her actually take a breath, and then she reengaged. I think for
Mhm.
her I asked her later how she was feeling, and she said she is very, very relaxed, and I think was just not
Mhm.
connected completely with her body maybe.
Well, what's interesting also is forgetting to breathe can actually be an ADD or ADHD symptom. There are a lot of times when I realize I haven't breathed, and I'll do like a full on like, and then
Mhm,
like that's because I have to catch up or whatever. I've
Mhm.
and it so my kids have learned that that's not me, sighing for attention or whatever. It's me remembering to breathe and kind of like actually breathing it and releasing it. So it could be partially that as well.
and that makes sense too, and I find like there's so many times in life that we're not breathing properly, and I
Mhm.
know, Ciana, when I was in your class, you would remind people to breathe, uh, and and it's easy. It's just it seems crazy that it's easy to forget to breathe, and obviously our bodies, when we pass out, will start breathing again, but it's really good not to get to
Yeah.
that stage.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah, I've
awesome.
had people tell me in my classes, like this is the first deep breath I've taken all week since last week when we did our class together, you know?
Mhm.
You know, like we aren't thinking about breathing all the time, obviously, because our body does it naturally. So it's nice to kind of take a moment and just like sit with that. Sit with what your body is like doing to keep you alive and appreciate it, you know?
Mhm.
Mhm.
So I think breathing is like probably maybe even more important than the asana in yoga.
Yeah.
Mhm.
When I was doing the apprenticeship at the Hendricks Institute, that was one of the key cornerstones of their practice. They call it the yes breath, and it's, people often aren't conscious of their breath, but our breath is actually a rolling wave that we roll it over. I like to think of those toys that you used to like push forward, and then the wheel would go up, and then it would go down, and then it would go up. You know what I'm talking about?
Oh, yeah, I had a little ball, I think.
Uh-huh. Or
Mhm.
yeah. And so I see breath as that. So it goes around the curve, and then it goes around the curve, right? And so the yes breath is just making sure that you roll your breaths, and you're conscientiously um rolling your breaths, right? Like you make a choice, and it's anyway. Um so that for me just solidified how important breathing, and not only relying on your autonomic, responses,
Mhm.
actually um, practicing breathing,
You
Mhm.
can change like how you feel and how your body's feeling just by altering your breath. Like,
Yeah.
you know, usually it goes the other way, right? Like you feel something and then your breath changes. Like maybe you feel anxious or excited or something and then your breath does something. But you can calm yourself down or hype yourself up or whatever by focusing on your breath and kind of working backwards, starting on your
Mhm.
breath, and then your body will say, oh, well, the breath is telling me that this is actually fine and that there's nothing happening and that I don't need to be anxious. So I will just calm right down. So it's pretty
Right.
cool how it can go either way.
It really is, and at night, Max, if he's having trouble sleeping, which makes me chuckle because his trouble sleeping is usually about 6 minutes long. I'm like, oh, I can't fall asleep. Hey, hey, trouble sleeping is 4 hours from now. But anyway, he says that every night he'll focus on his breathing and just put himself into more of a relaxed state. And I've tried it. I have not been hugely successful for some reason. And I remember one time I was at a yoga class and we were just beginning. We had just sat down on the mat and they said, okay, go ahead and take a deep breath and relax. And if you're feeling any tension, go ahead and release that, drop your shoulders. And I felt like I
And
had.
you woke up
And
45 minutes later?
that's right. No, unfortunately, no. But the instructor came behind me. I thought I was all relaxed. She came and she literally pushed my shoulders 2
Hmm.
inches down. And I'm like, "What?" I didn't even know they were up, but it had become such a chronic state for me that being like this was natural
Hmm.
and relaxing was the hard part. And I'm sure you found that in your classes. In fact, I think you've mentioned that to me in a class that you were teaching for me. But what do you do in a situation where you can tell that someone's really holding tightly? How do you encourage them to release?
One thing that I like to do is invite people to breathe into the areas where they're feeling tension. And that just kind of brings their attention that like to that spot a little bit more so that they can, and then like with every breath, hopefully they're loosening up a little more, you know?
Mhm.
Mhm.
So that's usually what I do. But in-person yoga classes, I like personally love when people like push down on my shoulders and stuff too. So if
Mhm.
I was teaching in person more, I would definitely use that tool as well. It feels so good.
It really did. It was
Yeah.
it was almost like I got a massage and I didn't. She just pushed down. What was so funny to me is that realization of where I was in space. And when I do
Mhm.
massages and before I have someone go home, I remind them to notice where they are in space and that kind of thing. And it's amazing also that we are so often out of balance, out of alignment. We have parts higher or lower, and not because of a physiological reason, just that's what we did. In fact, I gave a massage this morning, and I could tell that she had an issue going on her right side, and I said, Please pay attention to your posture because you do have a
Mhm.
physiological concern, and you're creating a bigger concern because you're so far out of alignment for the rest, trying to protect this one part. And it's easy to do and even not notice. When I was swinging my leg, when I was having my hip issue, I didn't know I was doing it. Max said, "Didn't you notice that you were TikToking?" I'm like, "No." No idea. I had no idea.
Mhm.
And he brought it up because of my ponytail swinging. So that's something now, if I have someone I notice them going out of balance, I'll tell them to watch their hair.
Mhm.
Because when they have long hair, of course, not if they're really buzz cut, but long hair, watch your hair, not do anything. But with longer hair, when a person's out of balance, they'll swing their hair. And that is sometimes what people will notice before they notice anything else.
Yeah.
That's so interesting that you say that, because another way to kind of get people to, maybe relax or change something is saying it in a bunch of different ways.
Yeah.
Because, if you say clearly when she said relax your shoulders, that wasn't like enough direction for you, or something like, it didn't quite get you to that relaxing your shoulders part. But maybe if she had said lift your ears away from your shoulders or something
Oh,
like that, you know, or
sure.
lift your head towards the ceiling or something, that could have clicked a little better. So I do think that, like, kind of saying things in different ways is a great way to work through those kinds of things that you can see in a class.
It's funny because when we first started doing yoga, Ciana, I think probably every session you said at least once, if not more, drop your shoulders,
Mhm.
drop your shoulders.
Mhm.
And of course, then once we were doing it for enough time, then I didn't need to be reminded, it was just natural.
Exactly. And after you don't need to be reminded to drop your shoulders anymore, you can use that like brain power that you were using on that to now focus on a different part of your body and, getting that more into alignment. Or, in yoga, there's this thing called like your subtle body. So once you're in a pose and you're feeling really confident in, your all your body parts are in the right place, there's even you can go even deeper. You can practice, spreading your fingers wider, clawing through your fingers, pointing your elbows forward. It depends on what the pose is, obviously, but there's just so many little tweaks, and you can just go deeper and deeper into it, which I think is really awesome. And then not only that, you can get deeper and deeper into yoga beyond the poses as well. So both.
I
Sure.
really love the idea of it being, did you say 8 branches? How
Mhm.
many? Yeah.
Yep, 8 branches.
That there's a lot more to it, because I never had any idea there was more to it
Mhm.
other than trying not to fall over when I'm in a
Mhm.
pose. And one of the things that I like, I've had a few yoga classes with a variety of teachers, and the ones that I connected to the most were the ones that, like where you've done, it's okay if you can do it, if you do it differently, modify to your own comfort. And
Mhm.
what I could do 6 months ago, maybe I can't do now. Maybe something I couldn't do 6 months ago, I can do now. And as you talk about, when I feel comfortable with one part of it, then I can focus on the other.
Mhm.
And I love that. And also, I feel like that if we apply that more to one of the other branches in our daily life and realize that we're moving forward. When I do coaching, I have a coaching mentoring program, and I have people keep a little journal. Where are you today? Because in 6 months, they're going to feel like maybe they didn't go very far, but when they look
Mhm.
back where they were 6 months ago, they realize that it's a huge change. And
Mhm.
and I think that we become unused to watching our improvements, and we just look at where we're failing, if you will. And
Yep.
that was air quotes too, because since our listeners cannot see our hands, uh, but I feel like in our lives we spend just way too much time without grace for ourselves and the people around us.
That is so true. And I think that's why it's important to emphasize that yoga is a practice. Every time we do yoga, we are practicing it. We're never going to be perfect at it. Like I said, you can always go deeper, you can always, learn more. So it's all about starting where you're at, and in my opinion, like making the yoga work for you. Because if you are feeling pain, like if you're trying to do a pose and it's painful, that's not that's not how I want you to experience
Yeah, that's
yoga.
not for you, right?
Yeah, I want you to feel good, and I want you to listen to your body, and I want you to make adjustments so that you're enjoying yourself and you're getting a good stretch, and also, challenging yourself a little bit. Like it doesn't have to, you don't have to do any certain type of pose or whatever to be doing yoga. So yeah.
Well, and one of the things I liked when you were teaching a class, and another lady I really connected with, where even if you lost your balance or something like that, you just brought yourself back up and you may have said something about you got to correct this or that, which was good too, because if I'm looking at you, the person who can turn into a pretzel, doing things and struggling sometimes, then it gives me a chance to know that it's, as you say, a practice and it'll be
Mhm.
different every single time. So I love that
And
about.
isn't that just like such a like life lesson too? Like if you fall
Mhm.
over, get back up, you know? I just really like how those little things in yoga that are kind of these phrases we use all the time, they just like really apply everywhere, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And and what does it take when you feel like you're struggling to stay focused and not beat yourself up? Do you have little ways that you do it?
It can be
Like,
really, really tough for sure. I like to remind myself, you know, I'm not gonna have the same balance, ability, whatever, every single day. I could be having a bad day today. I could have worked out yesterday. You know, anything could happen that could have changed how I'm experiencing yoga today. And so I like to remind myself that it's okay to have like ups and downs, you know, with how you're experiencing the poses or whatever. Um, and then also, wait, I'm sorry, what was the question? I had another answer, but I forgot what the question
um,
was.
well, I was asking you, how do you kind of get yourself back on track? Like
Motivate
when,
yourself. Yeah.
Yes.
right.
Yes. Another thing is just starting with like, if I'm having a time where I am like, ugh, it's time to do yoga, which yes, it does happen to me, even though it makes me feel great.
Mhm,
Afterwards, I still get that. Sometimes what I'll do is I'll just sit down and just like breathe for a little bit. And maybe that turns into moving and maybe it doesn't, but either way, at least I kind of gave it a shot. Or I will choose like 3 poses that I know will feel really, really good for today, like on my body where I'm feeling pain, and I'll just do those.
mhm,
So, it doesn't have to be an hour every day. Some people love that, and some people do that. Some people do 5 hours a day, you know? But in my opinion, like, even just, like, 1 minute a day, 5 minutes a day, 3 poses a day, that's that's enough to be doing yoga and to be getting some of the benefits. Maybe you're probably not getting more benefits, you know, if you're doing an hour versus doing like 5 hours, right? You might be getting more benefits if you're doing an hour versus 5 minutes though.
Right.
But even at 5 minutes, you are still getting the benefits of the yoga and, you know, things like working on your body, getting in touch with yourself, taking a moment away from all the noise. All of those things are happening even if for just 5 minutes, so
well, and it also is part of the building of a habit where you
mhm,
say sometimes it's just like, oh, and it's funny sometimes how hard it is to do things that are healthy sometimes.
mhm,
Like, oh my goodness. But I find for me, and maybe this is true for you as well, that sometimes I think, well, shoot, if I can't do the whole thing, why even bother? And
mhm,
that's sort of, well, it's quite self-defeating because, like you said, 5 minutes of any healthy behavior is better than 0 minutes of any healthy behavior. Or if I think that it has to be perfect or else
mhm,
I won't. My family used to play a lot of tennis, and there was someone I played with sometimes who wanted me to play exactly perfectly. And I said, "But I am playing and
mhm,
I'm doing fine." And I was told I was running around too much. I'm
mm.
like, "Well, if I'm hitting the ball and I'm not falling down, so?" And
Yeah,
it took me a long time to be able to be a proponent for my own activities.
mhm,
And that's one thing that I think can be a challenge for people generally, to just stand up for what I need. So maybe
mhm.
you're in a group or a family and they say, "Well, we don't have time to have you do that." Then that's the time that maybe you can say, "Well, I have 5 minutes and so do you. Let's do this together."
Yep, mhm, and that's a practice too, right? Like, exactly what you were just saying where you you make that time for yourself and you give yourself that grace and you know, kinda take a step back and look at it from a bigger picture. All of that is part of the practice of yoga, honestly.
Yeah.
I'm a yoga master. I had no idea.
You did it.
I did it. Unfortunately, I can't do many of the poses and I fall over when I do a tree, but other than that, I've got it.
But other than that, you're a yoga master.
Oh, awesome. That's awesome. So, how do you encourage or suggest people might try yoga? What do you do to get people to try it for the first time?
So I think if it's a situation where I can like teach them for their first time, I think that teaching one-on-one versus like someone going to a class that's already like preset and the class has a bunch of people in it, it can be so much more powerful. So if someone's like, "Oh, I'm scared of yoga. I'm not flexible enough for yoga," or something like that, I think it's really awesome to get some like one-on-one time because that person can give you very specific advice about, how you can make adjustments and things like that. Because it's true that, making adjustments in yoga, if you can't do like a warrior two or something for some reason, making adjustments, like you do have to kind of have some knowledge already to be able to
Mhm.
do that for yourself. But if you're a beginner and you're one on one, then someone can make those adjustments for you. So I think that kind of one-on-one is like a great way to start if you're feeling a little nervous or a little scared. There's also a really, really great yoga teacher on YouTube that I always recommend for kind of beginners. Yoga with Adriene. If you've ever looked up yoga on YouTube, you have definitely seen her. She's very, very popular on there. But I love her videos because she is very friendly to beginners. She offers tons of modifications, which modifications are awesome. They're not bad. Um, and she also does bring in the other limbs too, which I really appreciate. And she doesn't make it too like preachy. Sometimes yoga
Mhm.
can be a little preachy. She always uses this phrase I love where she says like, if that's not sticking with you, drop it. But if it is, then run with it. So I really like that. So I would definitely recommend checking her out or trying to get like a one-on-one class. A lot of yoga teachers will do one-on-one sessions. So worth looking
That's
into.
great, and I also like it because I know one of my first yoga experiences was in a big class at a regular gym,
Mhm.
and I was towards the back because I had come a little bit late off work, and I couldn't see the yoga instructor, and the pieces people closest to me were doing all kinds of different things,
Mhm.
and I wasn't sure what I was supposed to be doing, and it was feeling a little frustrating, and I'm left-handed, so often I start with incorrect side,
Mhm.
not by side, and
Mhm.
and then I become twisted going the wrong way because they
Yeah.
wanted me to go right and I went left, and it was actually a hard experience because I felt like all of it was just too overwhelming,
Mhm.
and, so I really like the one-on-one or even maybe a smaller class of 3 or 4 where the instructor has a chance to talk to people, and then people don't get lost in the class itself and then get frustrated.
Mhm.
Um, so I like that idea a lot to give it a go. And a lot of times we can do things on YouTube, but I think it's important to have at least a couple in-person sessions so that a person can make sure they're in good body mechanics because it's really easy to do things poorly and not realize it, especially if you're used to doing things poorly. Do you have any
Eh,
recommendations for people who might be watching YouTube to keep themselves safe?
so there are also videos on YouTube, not to refer you back to YouTube, but
Mhm,
there's another yoga teacher on there, Yoga Upload, and Yoga with Adriene has this as well. They actually have specific videos on how to like do the most common poses really safely or how to find all the nuances in them. So you can definitely check that out. But I also think like you're saying, the body awareness of it all is also is part of the practice too. Um, you know, I feel like before I started doing yoga and honestly like hula hooping too, I had no body awareness. Like I thought I was doing something, but my body was doing something totally different and I had no idea. But
mhm,
with more and more practice, when a teacher says like, you know, to move your knee out, before I would be like, move my knee out. I don't know what that means, first of all.
mhm.
and second of all, my knee is out, like whatever. But then you can find these like little subtle differences the more you practice. So maybe my knee was here and now it just needs to be like here. You know what I mean?
Mhm, mhm.
So, and I can't, that's bad for a podcast. You can't see my hand. But,
Well, it
but like, I
changed
just mean like
slightly.
the subtle, the very, very subtle changes are like more important than trying to find like the perfect pose. Additionally, our bodies and like the pain in our bodies and how our bodies feel is a really, really good indicator. So if something feels wrong, um, not saying it's wrong, but like you should do something different.
Mhm.
If something
Yeah.
if something's hurting, if something feels like really, really, really difficult, if you can't breathe while you're in that position, you should make an adjustment of some kind. It could be, you know, you're moving your legs closer together, you're shortening your stance, you are maybe, I don't know, doing something else. But like you can do all sorts of things just to make the pose like a little bit easier, which can help you get into that proper alignment that won't cause injury. So I think it's actually really, really important to not do the full expression, again in quotes, of certain poses, because if you are and your body's not ready for that, you really can injure yourself. So take those modifications, you know, do those little easier versions because that's where you start.
Mhm. One thing I noticed too is, uh, I have short legs. That's not what I noticed. I knew that. And one of the classes I went to, the woman had very long legs, and I was
Mhm.
trying to sort of match her positioning, and I was struggling like crazy, and I couldn't figure out why, because I had done yoga before reasonably successfully at a very low level, despite my master status now. Um, and I couldn't figure out what was wrong.
Mhm.
And all of a sudden, I just felt like, well, this just must be a hard day for me or something. And then I realized what I was doing is that I was going far beyond my stretch and step ability
Mhm.
because I was trying to match where her hands were in relationship to the mat and everything else. And once I realized that we were built differently, I
Yeah.
was able to do that modification. And technically, it probably wasn't a modification because I was probably actually doing it correctly at that point. But I feel like it's important for people to also pay attention to what they're comparing themselves to, if you will. Because first off, I don't think we really totally should, because there's a lot of differences between our bodies. So maybe the alignment and the overall pose, but paying attention to where our extension is and our flexion is versus Gumby next to us who can do everything.
Mhm.
So, and so when I realized that, that made a huge difference on how I approach my other classes, because I realized that I was just different and
Yeah.
had to watch for things like that.
One thing that I like, is for situations like that is kind of starting at like when you're guiding yoga, like when I'm guiding yoga, I like to start at the level that most everyone can do. And then it's like if you're not feeling any stretches or anything, then you can add on a little bit. And then that way people don't feel like they're not doing the pose because you start at the edge and move backwards. You kind
Mhm.
of start at the easiest version and then they have the option to get harder and harder, you know?
Mhm.
I think that's kind of something I've noticed lately in the yoga community that is changing a little bit is a lot less people trying to like prove that they can do certain poses or something like that, and a lot more kind of making yoga work for you. And like another thing too is that in yoga classes, people will often, or the teacher will often say like to find your edge. I don't know if you've ever heard that before,
Mm-mm.
but everyone's so like your edge would be a place where you feel challenged, but you can still breathe, you know, really easily. So that's your balance that you have to find. And everyone's edge looks different.
Mhm.
And so that's another thing to keep in mind is um, if you might have a different edge than the person next to you. You can't get into that shape because you don't have enough of the flexibility or the strength yet. You got to work your way up to it, you know. And that's what yoga will do for you if you keep doing it. So,
Mhm. So you're
Yeah.
saying basically it's been 3 years since I've done yoga. Maybe I'm not as good a shape as I was 3 years ago for yoga?
I mean, maybe. You could be.
Maybe I could be. Nope.
It's like
That'd be
not
cool if
going
you were.
straight to the 100-pound dumbbell, starting with the 5 pound or whatever.
Exactly. Yes, that is such a good analogy because, like, isn't that so obvious, to anyone,
Yeah,
right? That's so
yeah.
obvious. But in yoga, like, that's just not how yoga historically has been taught or treated. It's kind of more of this like status thing where you're like showing something off. So I really appreciate that the that's been changing.
Mhm.
Like even online and in the communities and in classes and all that stuff, it's changing a lot. So
So what are your recommendations for finding a good yoga instructor, and avoiding not good yoga instructors?
good question. I think that yoga instructors, a lot of it is preference. So, there's this yoga teacher at this gym I go to, and he's a very popular yoga teacher, but I really do not like his classes because when I go, he talks so much. Like he talks like the whole time. I never feel like I have time to kind of sit in my own brain. And he's talking about like the the poses and everything, but it's just too much direction in my opinion. But apparently other people like it.
Mhm.
Mhm.
So my suggestion would be to try a few out. Try a few yoga teachers out, see how you feel after, see how your body feels. Do you feel relaxed? Do you feel like you got like that meditation piece of it? Um, the next day, do you feel good sore or bad sore? I think just kind of experimenting and figuring it out. I think some people might not like yoga with Adrienne for kind of the opposite reason. She like that sometimes you're holding a pose for a long time, and usually it's just like a sitting pose or something. It's nothing too hard, but it can get really tiring just sitting there for a long time. And so but a lot of people love yoga with Adrienne. So I really do think it's a preference thing. I would suggest going to classes that are led by instructors that took a 200-hour course at least, because they did learn about the anatomy, the limbs of yoga, and so much more. And those are really important, I think. And you can actually find out about that through this website called Yoga Alliance. It's yogaalliance.org. That's who kind of accredits. Is that a word? Accredits?
Mhm. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, cool. That's who accredits the different yoga schools that do the 200-hour training. So I would definitely suggest making sure that you're taking it from someone who has that accreditation and kind of that 200-hour training, because anyone can call themselves a yoga teacher, and some people get hired without that accreditation. It's not required to, for a job or anything.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that because I literally was just gonna ask you if there is any requirement. And so is it at say I go to the gym up the street,
Mhm.
and do they have to tell me what the training of the yoga instructor is if I ask?
Um, I don't know. I don't
Hmm.
know if they have to tell you that. I do know that Yoga Alliance has all of the like accredited teachers are on there. So if you know the teacher's name, you can look them up and see if they have
Mhm.
that. But I'm not sure if like the gym has to do anything. I think most gyms and most yoga studios and everything, they will only hire accredited teachers for the most part. And it's kind of like a liability thing for them, right?
Yeah,
Like
I would
they want to
expect
make
so.
sure they're hiring someone that kind of knows what they're doing. But if someone starts their own yoga studio, or if it's a smaller yoga studio, it's definitely not like a required thing. It's just kind of a comforting thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, but
So
I
I guess
definitely
that's gonna
recommend a yoga teacher from there, because after going through the 200-hour training myself, I I did not know anything about yoga before. That's what it
Yeah.
feels like. So yeah.
yeah, there is a lot to learn, and in my massage practice, we did 850 hours.
Mhm.
And that's a lot, but we're touching people,
Yeah,
and
like
in
maneuvering their bodies and stuff.
mhm, and so we really get to know. And in some states, a person does not have to be licensed, and that's where I was
Mhm.
wondering about the yoga instructor. So it's good to know because there have been a few times where I've gone where it seemed like maybe they didn't know much more than I did about yoga,
Mhm.
even though my vast training that I'm getting today. But I think that's important to keep a person's own body safe, to make sure
Mhm.
that they're getting working with someone who actually does know all of the body mechanics and things like that, that they get to know to not get injured. Because
Mhm.
even though people are like, well, it's just yoga. Yeah, it is. However, it isn't just anything. It's
Yeah.
still active movement, active stretching, active, all of those things. And
Weight
say,
bearing, moving your weight around.
right,
Yeah.
right. And if a person has a physiological concern, say, I don't know, hip replacement or something like that, they would be served to tell their instructor though, so they can keep an eye out for things, because there are points and end points in movement that might be sooner for someone with an injury or a recovery like that versus someone who's 20 and has never had an injury.
Yeah. Yeah. I injured my ankle in like September or something, and it was it was a learning experience to kind of refigure out how to do yoga without kind of being too imbalanced and like only doing yoga on my left side.
Mhm, mhm,
But also not overdoing it on the ankle. So, yeah, definitely worth telling your teacher if you have anything like that, because they can help you figure out again those like modifications or anything like that to keep you safe.
mhm. That's great. And so if I were going to a yoga class and I'd never been to one, how would you recommend I dress and what would you recommend I bring?
So if you have a yoga mat, you can bring that. If not, a lot of places have yoga mats available. Sometimes they cost money, sometimes they're free. Definitely bring a water bottle. Um,
With water in it.
with water in it.
What?
Yes. And then in my experience, anything else that you might need for the class is generally provided by the studio. So in certain classes, you might want to have like a towel because you might get real sweaty. Some of them,
Mhm,
that's the point of it, right? So they usually would provide a towel for you, or some of them you might need like a strap or a block, a yoga block or something like that, so that you can bring the floor closer to you, or you can reach things with the strap or things like that. Those are typically provided by the yoga studio. So, in general, water bottle, yoga mat, if you have it, that's
mhm.
really all you need, and a good attitude.
Good attitude.
um,
And I've seen some people wearing a shoe or some sort of a sock. Is that necessary?
yeah, so I was gonna say, what you wear, just something that's easy to move around in, and then also something that isn't gonna like that's not too flowy. I've worn like flowy clothes to yoga before, and then I'm like in downward dog, and my sports bra is showing because my shirt is like falling over my head and stuff. So definitely would recommend tighter clothes, but something that's comfy to move around in. And
Mhm,
then you do not wear shoes during yoga unless you have to for some reason,
mhm,
but you don't wear shoes into like yoga classes. Though I usually don't wear socks either, but you can if you're more comfortable with that. I find that socks are a little slippery, so I like to kind of use my feet to like not be so slippery. But
mhm,
there are these new, or I don't know if they're new, but they're new to me. These new socks I've been seeing that people are wearing to like yoga and to gymnastics and things like that, where you're
mhm.
like your toes are out. Have you
Yeah.
guys seen those? Is that what
Uh-huh.
you're talking about?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So those are actually awesome because you can get the best of both worlds. I feel like
Mhm,
you get your toes can like grip onto the floor, which a lot of yoga needs. But if you're like weirded out by maybe you're using the studio's yoga mat or something, maybe you
mhm,
want socks on, you can have that. So I actually quite like those. But I my friend uses them, she loves them. You
mhm,
definitely don't need them though. You don't
mhm,
need any type of clothes in particular for yoga, just something that you can move in. So yeah. And you don't really like need any supplies either. I mean, a mat is great to have, but if you don't have a mat, you can still do yoga. You can do it on
mhm,
floor. So, you really don't need anything. A lot of the stuff that we see is possibly just capitalism trying to monetize things that are
Yeah.
supposed to make us feel better. So,
Sure. Yeah, you'll do much better yoga if you wear this cute little outfit. You'll
exactly.
definitely do better.
Yep.
That's awesome.
So obviously our podcast is Mystic Detectives. What would you say, if anything, is mystical about yoga?
Can you kind of define mystical a little bit?
I feel like mystical is unexplainable. Um, it is it's witnessed by more than
Mm,
witnessed by more than one person. Um, Would you think of anything else, Andrea?
Yeah, I think that, and maybe something that I might not be able to say, this happened because of that, but I did this and
Mhm.
I felt that. Does that make
Mhm.
sense?
Yeah. So one thing that I noticed once I started teaching yoga, at first I was super nervous because I was like, what if I do something wrong? What if what if they hate it? What if I'm a bad teacher? What if I just, I tell them to do the wrong thing or something like that? But I kept getting this feedback that like they felt so much better and everything I was doing was helping them and it was working and things like that. And so I think what I kind of learned about it is like the yoga like speaks for itself. I'm really just someone who like learned about it and knows enough about it to share, but
Mhm,
I'm not really like doing much. It's the yoga that's doing the work. Even my dad who is not into mystical stuff. Maybe I don't know, is this a weird story? Maybe it is.
No.
But
Wow.
he there was one time where he was, like, super constipated, and he was like, "I'm in pain, like, I'm having a hard time." And I was like, "Lay on your back and bend your knees and lay your legs to the right." Nope, to the left. And he
mhm.
did it, and he wasn't constipated anymore, and like, just the fact that it works on, like, non-believers, like,
Mhm.
is a little mystical, you know? Um, and then I think just the the process of, like and I know this is kind of a process, and we talked about how it's a process, but I still think it kinda fits the bill, is when you practice things on the mat, it starts showing up in your life too. So,
Mhm.
being kinder to yourself on the mat equals being kinder to yourself in person, maybe even being kinder to other people, things like that. So, I would say that those are kind of the mystical things about it.
Okay. It's rooted in mysticism also, isn't it? But with the yogis and that sort of thing.
So, I know that a lot of like asana, so the postures started because people were looking for ways they could keep their spine in like a neutral position. So for meditation. So
Mhm.
it did kind of spawn out of like meditation, which is definitely mystical in my opinion.
Mhm, mhm.
And it kind of just grew from there. So I think it is like definitely rooted in at least like that mystical meditation.
Cool.
Yeah, I like
Cool.
that. I like that also there is, as you talked about, a physiological thing that happens when a person
Mhm,
puts their legs to the left, and it can
mhm.
open up some of the flow of the intestines. And when you talk about energy or chi moving, then it's a part of that as well, which is maybe the mystical part.
Yes, so true.
Kind of unrelated, but also sort of related. I still every night when I go to sleep, I lay on my left side and I tell myself, "Baby loves the left," because that's the best way to lay when you're pregnant. But like it helps me to remember like to lay on my left and
Yeah.
like I know I sleep better on my left, and it's just a funny thing that it's that same physiological response to the movement of my body.
So I've always been told, like, because of the way that your intestines are, that you should always twist to the right first, because if you twist to the left, then you can get constipated,
You know,
basically.
it's crazy.
But
I always start on the right, and then
yeah,
I have my little weird baby loves left.
nice. Yeah, so but this is specifically about, like, twisting. So, like, twisting
Mhm,
to the right. The reason that I said legs to the left, though, is because when you're laying down and you drop your legs to the left, that actually is a right twist. I know it's a little confusing,
mm,
but twist
mhm,
right
mhm.
first.
Gotcha, gotcha. Well, and
And then I
also
just
I
wanted to mention, like, the chakras and all that kinda stuff too. There's so much about that stuff in yoga. There is this belief about, like, the line of energy from your head to kinda your tailbone. It's your spine, right? Your
mhm,
spine is so, so important in
That's the
yoga, like
kundalini energy, right?
yeah, exactly. It's also called, like, prana is another
mhm,
and prana, is the first part of pranayama, which pranayama means breath. So, the breath and the energy are linked. There's also all sorts of kinda, like, subtle body things you can do that you can learn in your body, like, there's this thing called the root lock. It's like when you pull your pelvic floor up. There's, like, a stomach lock or something where you, like, hold your belly button in and up. So like those are related to like your chakras and that prana as well. And so that's a little bit I wish I could like talk more about it, but I don't it's a little tricky for me.
No, I love that. And also, I also when I'm talking to people in massage or some of the other work I do with people on body work, I remind them that they get to do the same thing on both sides.
Mhm.
So that's thing that I've noticed with the yoga instructors is that they make sure that the whole cycle goes through both sides if something is
Mhm.
specifically one-sided. And sometimes people say, "Well, I'm not tight on that side," or
Mhm.
whatever, and but they still need to be as balanced as possible. And you
Plus,
find that
isn't
as
it
well, right?
cool to just notice that and maybe even compare your 2 sides? Like, if one
Mhm,
side's super tight and then one side isn't, the more that you're stretching this side, you can compare it to how this side felt and you can notice it's getting better, right?
mhm. Yeah, I like
So
that, and go
so
ahead.
this is the only time that we advocate both sidesism.
Yes.
Both sides ism, that's right. That's so funny. Yeah, and it's just have you noticed, Sienna, over the years, any change in your physicality, any changes that you notice physically when you're into your yoga practice?
Yes, definitely. I've noticed just that I'm definitely stronger, specifically like my legs have gone way, way stronger. Um, I have noticed that I have, like I mentioned before, I have way more body awareness.
Mhm,
Like when we're practicing poses and someone says something just so minor that clicks for you that you suddenly get it, like it gives you that body awareness. Like I was like what you said with the ponytail, like seriously, something
mhm,
like that. Um, and then I think just a lot more body confidence. And like I think that's just from growing in yoga, like getting to see myself improve or make progress
mhm.
has given me a lot of confidence. So I know those weren't all physiological, but I would say that,
That's good.
yeah, I definitely noticed those differences. And then there's also tons of like attitude differences in myself too. Like I'm much kinder to myself, much kinder to other people, probably, things like that too.
That's great. And I would think that with that kindness, that maybe you might even have a little more patience to see and assist people to work through and yourself to work through the next step, the next phase.
Yep. Yep. That's huge is the patience. Everyone, me included, wants to be good at stuff,
Yeah.
Mhm.
you know? Um, but that's how you get good at stuff is that you practice. You be bad at it first.
Yeah,
Mhm.
which it's
So
a really funny actually that you say that because when you were a child, you were very much, if I can't do this perfectly, I give up on the first
yep.
try. Yeah,
Mhm.
and so I
I
love
know. I remember.
yeah, I love that that's part of what yoga has done for you is given you that perspective of there is, I mean, there there's very rarely perfection on the first try for
Yeah.
people, and you do have to work towards it.
Mhm. And like being bad at stuff isn't always the fun part. I totally get that.
Mhm.
I totally understand that. But if you keep working at it, if you're enjoying it enough to keep working at it, it will get more fun.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that's a good thing too, maybe that you could bring up to clients, and maybe you do if maybe they didn't have the best experience their first time. Do you recommend people try maybe 3 or 4 times before they see whether yoga is a fit for them? Or is there sort of a magic number that if a person gets to point X, they
Mhm.
usually will move into it more easily?
Like I was saying about the teachers, I do think that it's really valuable to try like a few different teachers, maybe even a few different styles. I'm a strong believer that I believe that yoga has great value for everyone. I know that not everyone wants to do yoga, and I'm fine with that. But if you want to do yoga, you definitely can, and you will get benefits out of it. Maybe you don't want to do the hot yoga though, but maybe you do. Like, I just think trying different things and giving it like a good shot, and trying different teachers, maybe trying different studios, you'll find something. I genuinely believe that you'll find something that speaks to you and sticks with you and that you enjoy. So.
Well, it looks like we are coming up to the end of our podcast. Anything else you'd like to say, Sienna, before we bid our listeners adieu?
I feel like if I say anything, it's gonna be like a whole other topic that we can talk about for an hour. Because I would love to talk more about the limbs and kind of what those are, but that's a whole
We
thing.
are very open to guests returning to our podcast, so
Okay,
that would be
Good.
cool.
awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, I would love to talk more about those. I think they're really, really interesting. The some of the yamas are like non-harming, and what else is there? Like strength versus um softness. Like it's sorry,
Mhm.
it's kind of hard to like a lot of the Sanskrit
Yeah.
doesn't really translate super clearly, and there's tons of different translations for each one. So that's why I'm like hesitating and trying to find the words and stuff. But like there's just so many interesting things about it that you don't like consider part of yoga until you start looking into it. And again, it's things that you can practice on the mat in order to like bring them out into your daily life.
Mhm.
So I'd love to talk more about those. They're very, very interesting, and there's a lot to say about them. I took a whole like 20-hour course on just the yamas and niyamas, which is just two of the branches. So
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, part 2.
I know, right?
That's great. Well, that was great. I really appreciate it, Sienna, and having experienced your classes and hearing some more of your thoughts about it has been really fun for me.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. This was super great.
We'd love to hear from our listeners. To leave a comment, share a story, or ask a question, email us at listeners@mysticdetectives.com. You can also find out about our Patreon and other interesting things going on at our website, mysticdetectives.com. As always, we invite you to subscribe, share, and leave reviews to support the podcast. Thank you for listening. We'll see you next week. Stay curious and keep exploring.